The old clock on the table signaled 5 in the morning. Under the flickering kitchen light, Amelie Carter quietly stirred her now cold cup of coffee. Last night, she had only slept a few hours after a long, exhausting day at Sterling Enterprises, but she had long grown accustomed to it. A single mother had no right to be tired. Her gaze drifted toward the small bed where Theo Carter, her son, was fast asleep. The little boy curled up under a thin blanket, his long eyelashes trembling slightly in sync with his steady breaths. His pink lips were slightly pursed, his tiny face radiating innocence Amelie was determined to protect. But what tightened her heart was the deep blue eyes of her son, eyes she had once seen on the face of another man, a man she had tried to forget for the past 5 years. She sighed softly, reminding herself not to dwell on the past. Amelie once had it all: a bright future, a promising career path, and a grand dream of transforming the financial world. As an outstanding finance student at the University of London, she had received multiple scholarships and internship offers from prestigious corporations. But then her life changed entirely in just one night. She discovered she was pregnant, just 1 year before graduation. At that moment, Amelie was overwhelmed, unsure of how to face this reality. She had waited for an explanation from the child's father, but that person vanished from her life as if he had never existed. She stood before 2 choices: abandon her dreams to keep the child or give up the child to pursue her career. And she chose her child. But the price of that decision was too steep. She dropped out of school, losing all the career opportunities she had worked so hard to build. The early years of being a single mother were filled with tears and struggles. With no degree and no experience, she could only take temporary jobs as a waitress, receptionist, and retail clerk just to make ends meet. It wasn't until Theo turned 3 that she got a chance to work as an administrative assistant at Sterling Enterprises, one of London's largest financial corporations. The salary wasn't high, but at least it provided her with a stable job and the ability to support her son. However, her life was still far from easy. The small apartment in the outskirts of London where she lived was just enough for the 2 of them. She struggled to pay rent, preschool fees, food, and a mountain of bills. No matter how exhausted she was, Amelie always made sure to keep a smile on her face when she got home. She never wanted Theo to sense her distress, but every day she wondered, was she strong enough to keep going? The pivotal moment, an inevitable decision. That morning, Amelie followed her usual routine, preparing breakfast for Theo, helping him into his uniform, checking his school bag, and then hurriedly getting ready for work. But just as she was about to head out with her son, her phone suddenly rang. "I'm sorry, Amelie, I can't watch Theo today. Something urgent came up." Her heart sank. She gripped the phone tightly, her voice turning desperate. "But I'm about to be late for work. I can't leave him home alone." The babysitter on the other end sighed apologetically. "I'm really sorry, Amelie. Can you find someone else to watch Theo?" But who else could she turn to? She had no family in London, and her friends were all caught up in their own lives. She glanced at the clock. Less than 30 minutes until she had to be at work. If she was late, she could be reprimanded or even fired. She turned to look at Theo. The little boy gazed up at her with bright, innocent eyes, completely unaware that his mother was facing a difficult decision. In the end, Amelie took a deep breath. She had no other choice. She had to take Theo to work. The towering Sterling Enterprises building stood in the heart of London, sleek and imposing. Much like its CEO, Amelie stepped through the revolving glass doors, gripping Theo's hand tightly as they entered the grand lobby. Employees in tailored suits rushed past her, moving with purpose. No one paid attention to the small woman holding the hand of a 4-year-old boy, but Amelie could feel the weight of anxiety pressing on her. Children were not allowed in this professional environment. She could only pray that she would be able to keep Theo in her office all day without anyone noticing. But she didn't know that fate had other plans. In just a moment, her son would unknowingly come face to face with the man Amelie had spent 4 years avoiding, and in that instant, her entire world would be turned upside down forever. Welcome to today's story. We hope all the best things come your way. Let us know what you think about our latest story, and don't forget to tell us which city you're watching from. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss a meaningful story each day. Chapter 1. The Fateful Encounter. At the top floor of Sterling Enterprises, Harry Sterling stood silently before the massive glass wall, his cold gaze fixed on the opulent skyline of London. The towering skyscrapers, the bustling streets, everything below was a part of the empire he had built with his own hands. At 35, Harry was one of the most powerful billionaires in England. He possessed a razor-sharp intellect, an unshakable decisiveness, and an empty heart. He had never believed in love, never thought that family was necessary. To him, emotions were a weakness, a force that could make people lose control and forget who they were. He had witnessed it firsthand as a child. His mother, a gentle yet fragile woman, had been abandoned by his father and spent the rest of her days in solitude. Harry had sworn never to let himself fall into the same emotional trap. He would never love, never trust, and never need anyone. But in just a few minutes, a 4-year-old boy would shatter everything he had ever believed in. A failed attempt to hide. In another corner of the building, Emily Carter sat at her desk, holding her breath, her eyes darting anxiously toward Theo, the 4-year-old son who was never supposed to be here. She had given him strict instructions. Stay quiet, no running, no leaving the room. But she knew how hard that was for an energetic child like Theo. The small office where she worked was no match for a curious little boy. And just as she had feared, in the brief moment she looked down to check her emails, Theo was gone. "Theo!" Emily gasped, spinning around. But the empty chair sent her heart plummeting. She shot to her feet, rushing out, her palms damp with sweat. If anyone found out she had brought her son to the office, she could be reprimanded or worse, fired. But the worst had yet to come. The fateful moment. The grand hallway leading to the executive offices of Sterling Enterprises was eerily quiet. Senior executives walked briskly, too preoccupied to notice a small child sneaking around. Eyes brimming with curiosity, Theo was sharp and perceptive. He knew his mother was worried, but he just wanted to explore a little. This place was nothing like the tiny neighborhood he and his mother lived in. It was huge, luxurious, and full of mystery. His small feet patted across the gleaming marble floors, and then, bam! Theo collided head-first into a man. The impact sent him stumbling backward, nearly falling, but when he looked up, his eyes widened in shock. The man before him was tall, dressed in a flawless, expensive suit. His chiseled face was strikingly cold, and his deep blue eyes were like the night sky. Instantly, Theo's little heart raced. Those eyes. He stared at Harry Sterling without blinking. For a brief second, it was as if some invisible connection had formed, something stronger than logic. And then, without hesitation, "Daddy!" Theo shouted in excitement and threw his arms around Harry's leg. A deadly silence. The entire hallway fell deathly still. Employees froze mid-step, staring. Harry Sterling, the man known for having zero personal attachments, now had a child clinging to him, calling him Dad. Harry's entire body went rigid. In all his life, he had never experienced a moment this bizarre. He looked down at the child clutching his leg, a boy with soft brown hair, wide round eyes, and most striking of all, the exact same deep blue eyes as his own. A cold wave of suspicion crawled down Harry's spine. Who is this child? His voice was low, laced with impatience. But Theo only hugged him tighter, his bright eyes filled with pure joy. "Daddy, I finally found you!" Emily appears, the truth in danger. At that moment, a panicked voice rang out. "Theo, no!" Emily came rushing in, her face pale, her eyes wide with horror, as she saw her son clinging to Harry Sterling. It felt like the world around her collapsed. No, this couldn't be happening. She had kept this secret for 5 years. She had done everything to bury the past. But in one reckless moment, her son had destroyed everything. Harry turned to her, his cold blue eyes sharp and filled with suspicion. "Emily Carter." His deep voice sent a chill down her spine. She clenched her fists, trying to stay calm. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling. This is a misunderstanding. I'll take my son and leave immediately." But before she could pull Theo away, Harry's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Wait." His gaze fixed on the child. "Why did this boy call me Daddy?" Amelie froze. The moment she had dreaded had arrived. Could she keep hiding the truth? Or was everything she had fought to protect about to be exposed? Harry stared at Theo, his piercing blue eyes filled with doubt, as if trying to piece together fragments of a forgotten past. The last time Amelie had seen that look in his eyes was 5 years ago, the last time they were together. A night she once thought she could forget, yet it had left an indelible mark on her life. 5 years ago, the night that changed everything. That evening, London sparkled with lights, the lively atmosphere of the charity gala filled with the refined laughter of the elite. The event was graced by the most influential figures in the financial world, including Harry Sterling, the young yet formidable CEO of Sterling Enterprises. Amelie had no intention of interacting with Harry. As a final-year finance student, she was merely part of the event organizing team. She had heard of him, a brilliant, decisive yet cold and emotionless man. And yet, fate had other plans. At the end of the gala, Amelie unexpectedly found Harry alone at the hotel bar. He seemed uninterested in the pretentious conversations happening outside, and somehow, she ended up sitting beside him. "I didn't expect to see Mr. Sterling sitting here alone," Amelie remarked, her voice light yet teasing. Harry looked at her, a faint smirk playing at his lips. "Then where do you think I should be? Out there shaking hands with people I don't even care about?" Amelie shrugged. "Perhaps, but I suppose you're not the kind of man who pretends." Harry was silent for a moment before ordering another drink for her. They started talking about work, about the invisible pressures both of them faced. Amelie soon realized that beneath Harry's arrogance and power, he was also a man with conflicts, burdens and wounds he never showed to the world. The first glass was finished, then the second, the third. Alcohol made the conversation easier, made the space between them smaller. Amelie didn't remember who initiated it first, but by the time she realized, they were in Harry's hotel suite, the doors closing behind them, shutting out the rest of the world. The morning after his silent disappearance, Amelie woke up to the dim morning light, her body still tingling with the remnants of the previous night's intoxication. But what left her feeling the most empty was not the hangover. It was the cold, empty space beside her. Harry was gone. No note, no sign that the night had meant anything to him. She looked around the vast hotel suite, feeling like she had woken up from a dream, one that was never real. She had thought there was something special between them, but she had been wrong. To Harry Sterling, she was nothing more than a fleeting indulgence. She left without a word, and she tried to forget that night, but fate wouldn't let her. 2 months later, a life-changing truth. When Amelie held the pregnancy test results in her hands, it felt as if her entire world collapsed. She had once dreamed of great things, to become a financial expert, to build a thriving career, but now everything was crumbling. She didn't know what to do. For days, she wrestled with herself in endless sleepless nights, staring at the ceiling, asking herself, could she raise a child alone? Was she strong enough to move forward without Harry? Should she try to find him? But Amelie had no way to reach Harry. He was a billionaire, a man who lived in a world completely separate from hers. How could someone like him even remember a nameless girl he had spent just one night with? And so she made her choice. She would keep the child, even if it meant walking a difficult road alone. She gave up everything, university, career, future, but she never regretted it. Now standing before Harry once more, Amelie felt as if the past was tightening its grip around her throat. He was still cold, still powerful, still commanding, just as he had always been. But his eyes were no longer those of a stranger. They were the eyes of a man piecing together the forgotten fragments of the past. "Amelie," his voice was deep, dangerous. "Why did the boy call me Dad?" he repeated. Amelie felt her entire body freeze. She could lie, she could try to deflect, But she knew Harry Sterling was not a man easily deceived. Could she keep hiding the truth? Or was this the moment everything came crashing down? She didn't answer. Instead, she quickly grabbed Theo and walked away. Chapter 2. The truth begins to unfold. The office door closed behind them, leaving a suffocating silence between two people caught in the storm of emotions. The next day, Harry summoned Amelie to his office. She stood tall, forcing herself to appear composed, but inside, every nerve in her body was pulled tight as a breaking wire. Harry leaned against his desk, arms crossed, his deep blue eyes piercing into her as if peeling back every layer of the secrets she had tried so hard to keep. There was no doubt about it. He wanted the truth now. "Tell me, Amelie." His voice was low, authoritative. Not a question, a demand. "Is Theo my son?" Amelie clenched her fists, forcing herself to breathe steadily. She couldn't tell him the truth. She wouldn't. If she admitted it, he wouldn't stop. She lifted her gaze, looked straight into his eyes, and answered firmly, "No." Silence suffocated the room. Harry stared at her, searching for a flicker of dishonesty. A flicker he found instantly. A glint of anger flashed through his eyes, but his voice remained unnervingly calm. "You think I'll believe that?" Amelie didn't blink. "I don't care if you believe it or not. It's the truth." Harry let out a cold laugh, one that sent chills down her spine. Pushing off his desk, he took slow, deliberate steps toward her, the sound of his polished shoes echoing in the vast office. "Really?" He raised an eyebrow. "Then explain something to me, Amelie. Why does Theo have my eyes? Why did he call me Dad the moment he saw me? Do you really expect me to believe that's just a coincidence?" Amelie took a step back instinctively, but she quickly tightened her fists, refusing to be intimidated. "Children say things randomly, Harry. He could have called anyone Dad." Harry nodded slowly, but his eyes only darkened further. "Sure, but not everyone has my exact same eyes." Amelie bit her lip, struggling to keep her composure. "You've had plenty of women, Harry. Maybe it's just a coincidence. Maybe I had a child with someone else. What does it matter to you?" Her words cut like a blade, but Harry wasn't a man who bled easily. His lips curled into a faint smirk, but it wasn't warmth. It was ice. "Do you really think I'll believe that lie?" he murmured, his voice dipping into something dangerously quiet. A storm was brewing beneath the surface. "You're trying to push me away, Amelie. But you know very well I'm not a man who lets go when something doesn't add up." Amelie's pulse hammered. For a split second, her eyes wavered, but she forced herself back into control. "I don't care what you think, Harry. We don't need you." This time, his patience snapped. "Don't need me?" His voice turned sharp. "You think you get to decide that? If Theo's my son, I have a right to know. You can't hide that from me forever." "I'm not hiding anything because he's not your son," Amelie shot back, her breath ragged. The air in the room crackled with tension, the fire of their confrontation scorching everything in its path. Harry's fists clenched at his sides, trying to hold back the fury burning in his chest. He had never been denied anything in his life, never been lied to like this, and Amelie was pushing him to the edge. Abruptly, he turned to his desk, pulled open a drawer, and slammed a thick file onto the table in front of her. "I had you investigated, Amelie." His voice was cold, ruthless. "I know you dropped out of university right after you got pregnant. I know you gave up everything to raise a child, and you want me to believe that child has nothing to do with me?" Amelie stared at the folder, her heart plummeting into darkness. He knew too much. Harry took another step forward, his voice dropping to a whisper, but each word dripped with lethal intent. "If Theo isn't my son, then why do you look so terrified?" Amelie lifted her head, her eyes blazing with defiance. "I'm not terrified. I'm furious that you're invading my privacy." "You're lying," he said instantly. Her breath hitched. Harry studied her, his icy blue gaze burning into her soul, and yet beneath that piercing intensity, there was something else, something he didn't even realize was there, a sliver of hurt. "If you're so sure," he murmured, Why don't we just do a DNA test? The suggestion made Amelie freeze. She didn't answer, and that silence betrayed her. Harry saw the hesitation flash across her eyes, and it only solidified his suspicions. "What are you so afraid of, Amelie?" His voice softened, but it held a dangerous edge. "If Theo isn't my son, then what are you trying to protect?" Amelie took a slow, measured breath. She had to stay in control. "I don't need to prove anything to you." Harry let out a cold chuckle. "You can refuse, Amelie, but I won't stop. I will get that test done, and when I have the results in my hands, you won't be able to hide the truth anymore." Amelie's heart pounded violently. She could feel it slipping away. The secret she had spent years protecting was being unraveled piece by Harry Sterling. The office door slammed shut behind her. Amelie walked briskly down the long hallway, gripping her purse like a lifeline. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, her breath still unsteady from the heated confrontation. He wanted a DNA test. He wanted the truth, but she couldn't let that happen. No matter what it took, she had to stop him. The next morning, no more running. The moment Amelie stepped into the office, Harry was already waiting, arms crossed, his sharp gaze locked onto her, a predator sizing up his prey. "I sent you the DNA test papers. Why did you refuse?" His voice was deep, steady, but Amelie could hear the impatience woven into every word. She didn't answer. She simply walked past him. But Harry Sterling was not a man to be ignored. He blocked her path in an instant, his blue eyes cold and unwavering. "Answer me." Amelie took a deep breath, then slowly lifted her head, her gaze unwavering. "Because I don't need to." Harry narrowed his eyes, his voice dropping into something far more dangerous. "What are you afraid of?" Amelie clenched her fists, forcing herself to stay calm. "I'm not afraid, Harry." Her voice was steady. "I just don't want my son to be part of this world, a world as cold, ruthless, and full of deception as yours." Harry froze for a second, then he let out a low, humorless chuckle. "Ridiculous. You think I would harm my own son?" "No." Amelie's response was instant, her voice sharp. "But you're not the kind of man who can be a father." The words hit like a blade, slicing through Harry's pride. His fists clenched at his sides, tension rippling through his frame. Not the kind of man who could be a father. He had never thought about fatherhood before, but that didn't mean he would abandon a child that was his. "I don't believe you." Harry's voice was ice. "If you have nothing to hide, why refuse the test?" Amelie bit her lip but stood her ground. "Because I don't need you, Harry." She met his gaze head on. "We've been fine for 4 years without you, and I don't want you coming in and turning everything upside down." Harry's eyes darkened, his expression unreadable. "You think you can erase me from my child's life that easily?" "Yes," Amelie didn't waver, "and I will do whatever it takes to protect my son." A deadly silence stretched between them, neither backing down, neither willing to surrender. But Amelie had no idea. Harry Sterling was not a man who walked away from something he wanted, and this time, he wanted the truth. Legal measures. A battle begins. Shortly after their confrontation, Harry summoned his legal team. "Tell me everything about parental rights. If Theo is my son, what can I claim?" The head of attorney hesitated but answered, "If you have DNA proof, you can petition for legal paternity, but it will depend on Amelie's legal standing and, most importantly, what's in the child's best interest." Harry nodded, determination burning in his gaze. He wasn't a man who enjoyed using the law as a weapon, but if Amelie continued to shut him out, he wouldn't hesitate. He had already lost 4 years of his son's life. He wouldn't lose another day. The innocence of a child. While Harry and Amelie waged their silent war, Theo remained blissfully unaware. The boy had taken an immediate liking to Harry, as if some invisible force drew him closer to this man. For the first time in his life, Harry felt something he had never known before. A warmth, foreign but undeniable, a small, trusting child who looked at him with admiration. Whenever Theo saw him, He ran straight into his arms, grabbing his hand excitedly to tell him about his day. Theo loved sitting on his lap, loved when Harry carried him, loved when Harry bought him ice cream and took him for walks, and that, more than anything, terrified Amelie. She saw the change in Harry. She saw the way he looked at Theo, the way he ruffled his hair, the way he listened to every little story with surprising patience. Harry Sterling was no longer just a ruthless billionaire. He was becoming a father, and that was what scared Amelie the most. If Harry decided to fight for Theo, she could lose him. She couldn't let that happen. No escape. Left. Amelie knew she couldn't keep running forever, but every time Harry appeared, every time Theo ran into his arms, she felt as if she was losing control. One afternoon, while Theo was playing on a slide at the park, Harry turned to her, his voice low, firm, unrelenting. "Sooner or later, I will have the truth. So you have two choices, Amelie." His gaze locked onto hers, sending a chill down her spine. "Work with me, or let me find out on my own." Amelie's heart plummeted. There was no escape. She didn't want to lose her son, but she also couldn't stop Harry forever, because this time, Harry Sterling didn't just want the truth. He wanted his son. Chapter 3. Emotional Shift. A Bond Takes Shape. A new reality for Harry Sterling. Harry Sterling had never imagined himself as a father. His life revolved around billion-dollar deals, endless meetings, and extravagant galas where people worshipped his power. Yet now, each passing day, a 4-year-old boy with an innocent smile was slowly reshaping everything he once believed. And it all began with small, unnoticed moments. In the mornings, as he walked into his company, instead of only thinking about contracts, his mind drifted to Theo's round face, the way he furrowed his brows in deep thought when explaining something that only children found important. In the afternoons, instead of staying late at the office, he found himself leaving earlier just to see Theo at the park and listen to his excited chatter about superheroes and adventures. "Do you like superheroes, Dad?" Theo still called him Dad so effortlessly. "I don't have time for superheroes." "So that means you're really busy, huh?" Theo blinked up at him. "Do you like ice cream?" Harry frowned. "Why would I eat ice cream?" "Because I love ice cream, and if you're my dad, then you should like it too, right?" Harry froze. Theo's words were so innocent, so pure, spoken as if it were the most natural truth in the world, as if he had never once considered the possibility that Harry might not be his father. And every time Theo ran up to hold his hand, every time he looked up at him with those trusting blue eyes, Harry felt something inside him beginning to change. Amelie begins to waver. Since discovering that Harry wanted a DNA test, Amelie had tried to keep her distance. She feared that once he had proof, he would demand his rights and take Theo away from her. But she couldn't stop her son. Theo was drawn to Harry in a way that Amelie couldn't explain. He was always happier when Harry was around, always ecstatic whenever he visited, always instinctively reaching for Harry's hand, as if they had known each other for years. And what shook Amelie the most was how Harry responded. At first, she had thought he was merely playing along, trying to win over Theo. But then she saw it. Harry truly cared about her son. He kneeled down to tie Theo's shoelaces when the boy couldn't do it himself. He listened patiently to Theo's endless stories about dinosaurs, superheroes, and magical quests. He bought Theo ice cream even though he had never once cared for sweets. And the way he looked at Theo, it was no longer the gaze of a cold, detached billionaire. It was the gaze of a father. A fever in the night, a genuine concern. That night, just as Amelie finished work, her phone rang. "Amelie, you need to come home now. Theo has a high fever!" Her heart pounded violently as she grabbed her things and rushed out of the office, racing home as fast as she could. When she entered their small apartment, she saw Theo curled up on the bed, his face flushed, his lips dry from the fever. "Mommy?" His small voice was weaker than usual. Twisting her heart in pain, she immediately grabbed a cool cloth, wiped his forehead, and tried to bring his temperature down. She gave him medicine, but his fever didn't subside. Theo's breathing grew heavier, his small body burning up, his eyelids drooping heavily. "No, I need to take him to the hospital." She quickly called an ambulance, but the operator's voice was grim. "There's a storm, heavy traffic. The earliest we can reach you is in 40 minutes. 40 minutes? Amelie's hands trembled. She couldn't wait that long. With no other choice, she grabbed her phone and with shaking fingers dialed Harry's number. It barely rang once before he picked up. What happened? His voice was deep, calm, but there was an urgency hidden beneath it. Theo has a high fever. I need to get him to the hospital, but the ambulance won't be here in time. I'm on my way." Before she could say anything else, he hung up. A race against time. Within 10 minutes, a sleek black Bentley came to a screeching halt in front of her apartment. Harry leapt out, his face tense. His blue eyes darkened with concern as he saw Theo weakly clinging to Amelie. Without a word, he opened the car door, carefully helping her place Theo in the back seat. Then he slammed the door shut, gripped the steering wheel, and without hesitation stepped on the gas, speeding through the stormy, rain-soaked streets. At the hospital, a night of silent understanding. Theo lay in the hospital bed, an IV drip attached to his small arm. His fever had finally subsided, his breathing now steady and peaceful. Amelie felt a wave of relief so overwhelming that she nearly burst into tears. But when she turned to the side, she froze. Harry was still there. He hadn't left. He had stayed up all night sitting by Theo's bedside. Dark circles shadowed his sharp features, yet his gaze remained soft, unwaveringly focused on Theo. And for the first time, Amelie saw something she had never expected from him. Harry Sterling, the ruthless billionaire, was capable of something more. He wasn't just a powerful CEO. He could be a father. And for the first time, Amelie was no longer so certain of everything she had believed, because maybe, just maybe, he truly deserved a place in their son's life. Chapter 4. Threats to their bond. The sky over London darkened, heavy clouds rolling in, signaling an impending storm. But the real tempest wasn't outside. It was inside Amelie's chest, raging wild and uncontrollable. She ran into the daycare, heart pounding with sheer terror, only to find Theo was gone. The teacher's panicked voice blurred in her ears as they explained that a man had come to pick up Theo. But when Amelie pressed for details, no one could provide a clear description of who he was. Only one chilling fact struck her like a death sentence. The man was not Harry. Her hands shook violently as she dialed the police, but waiting wasn't an option. Her mind spun with horrifying scenarios, each one worse than the last. Had she lost her son? Who had taken Theo? What did they want? What could she do? Only one person had the power to find her son as quickly as possible. With trembling fingers, she dialed Harry's number. The moment his deep voice came through the phone, she nearly broke down. "Theo is missing!" The deadly silence on the other end of the line felt as though Harry's entire world had just shattered. Then his voice came through, cold, sharp, commanding. "Tell me everything." "Who took him?" "I don't know, but—" Amelie gasped for breath, her voice breaking. "Harry, Theo is your son." The silence that followed was different this time. Not from shock, but from rage, cold, brewing, and lethal. "Damn it, Amelie, you should have told me this sooner." "That doesn't matter right now," she screamed, tears streaming down her face. "We need to find him." "I'll handle it." His voice was icy, unwavering. "But listen to me carefully, Amelie. From this moment on, I will never let you make decisions about Theo on your own again." Amelie didn't care about his warning. All that mattered was getting Theo back. She just wanted her son back. Less than 5 minutes after Amelie's desperate call, Harry's phone rang. An unknown number. He answered, and the moment that voice came through the speaker, filled with hatred and mockery, Harry's grip on the phone tightened. "Hello, Harry. Long time no see." Harry recognized the voice instantly. David Lancaster. Once a brilliant businessman, David had been one of his fiercest competitors until Harry crushed him. His company went bankrupt, his reputation was ruined, his assets were frozen. Harry never regretted what he had done, But now David had returned with only one purpose: revenge. And he had found Harry's greatest weakness: Theo. "I hope you haven't forgotten me, Harry, because today I want to make sure you never do." David sneered. "I have your son." Harry's chest tightened. His knuckles turned white as his grip on the phone hardened. His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "If you touch a single hair on his head, I swear I will kill you with my own hands." David laughed in amusement. "Relax, my old friend. Unlike you, I'm not a monster. I don't want to hurt the boy, but if you don't do exactly what I say, who knows what might happen." Harry's jaw clenched. "What do you want?" "It's simple." David's voice dripped with venom. "I want you to give up everything. Your company, your power, your reputation. I want you to beg for mercy. I want to see the mighty Harry Sterling suffer the way I did." Harry didn't flinch, but his mind was already racing through hundreds of scenarios. He knew David didn't just want to ruin him. He wanted to see him broken, and Theo was the perfect leverage to make that happen. "You will never get what you want," Harry said, his voice cold as steel. "But you will soon learn the price of touching my son." David laughed again. "We'll see, Harry. We'll see." Inside the warehouse, a game of power. Theo sat tied to a chair, tears streaking his small face, but he didn't scream. He trembled, his little hands shaking, but his blue eyes held a quiet, terrified resolve. David stood nearby, a gun in hand. The moment the warehouse doors creaked open, everything fell into a deadly silence. Harry walked in. David smirked at the sight of his old rival. "You got here faster than I expected, Sterling." Harry didn't look at him. His gaze was locked on Theo. "Dad?" Theo's voice was barely a whisper, a plea for help. Harry's expression softened, but his eyes were still as sharp as a blade when he turned to David. "Let him go." David chuckled, pressing the gun closer to Theo's temple. "Do you really think I'll just hand him over?" Harry inhaled deeply, slowly raising his hands in surrender. "I'll take his place." His voice was steady, unwavering. David blinked, caught off guard. "What the hell are you saying?" Harry took one step forward, his gaze locked onto David's. "Your problem is with me, not him. I will do whatever you want. Just let the boy go." David's smirk faltered as he hesitated, contemplating the offer. Harry took another step forward, his hand still raised, his eyes never leaving Theo. "I'm here now, buddy. I'm taking you home." Theo sniffled, his eyes bright with hope despite his fear. But then a noise. A sudden clatter from outside. Maybe the police. Maybe just the wind. David jerked in reaction, and his finger squeezed the trigger. The shot that changed everything. The gunshot echoed through the warehouse, a deafening crack that sent shivers down Amelie's spine. Harry's body stiffened, his legs buckling as he staggered, a sharp burning pain searing through his leg. Blood, a dark red stain, spread rapidly across his pants, soaking the fabric. "No!" Amelie's scream shattered the tense silence. Her hands clamped over her mouth as she watched through the gap in the door. And at that moment, chaos erupted. The police stormed in, commands were shouted, guns were raised. David barely had time to react before a bullet ripped through his shoulder. His gun clattered to the floor as he let out a guttural scream of agony. He didn't even get the chance to run. The officers tackled him instantly, pinning him down, his cries of pain swallowed by the storm of orders being barked around them. But Harry didn't care. Not about David, not about the blood soaking his clothes or the burning pain in his leg. His entire focus was on Theo. Despite the agony, despite the sweat beading on his forehead, he forced himself forward, dragging his body across the cold concrete floor. His breaths were ragged, pain shooting through every limb, but he didn't stop. His vision blurred, but he saw Theo, the small, trembling body tied to the chair, the tear-streaked cheeks, the wide, terrified eyes that had been desperately searching for him. He reached him. With a final burst of strength, Harry yanked the ropes off, gathering his son into his arms, pressing Theo's tiny, shaking frame against his chest. "I'm here. You're safe now." His voice was breaking under the weight of emotion. but his hold on Theo was unyielding. Theo sobbed into his chest, gripping his father's shirt like a lifeline. "Dad, don't leave me again." His voice was small, broken, filled with a plea so desperate that it shattered something inside Harry. His throat tightened. He shut his eyes, ignoring the pain, ignoring everything except the warmth of his son in his arms. He held him even closer, as if anchoring him to reality. Then, with a voice raw with pain and fierce determination, he whispered, "Never. I will never leave you again." A new beginning. As David was dragged away in handcuffs, his face contorted in rage and pain, Amelie finally broke free from her frozen stance and rushed to Harry's side. Tears streamed down her face as she dropped to her knees beside him, her trembling hands reaching for his leg, pressing against the wound in a futile attempt to stop the bleeding. "You're hurt." Her voice cracked as she looked at the growing pool of blood, panic flickering in her eyes. Harry exhaled sharply, his body exhausted, but a faint chuckle escaped his lips. His arms remained wrapped protectively around Theo, his fingers gently running through the boy's hair. "It's just a scratch." His voice was weak but steady. "As long as our son is safe, nothing else matters." Our son. For the first time, Amelie didn't flinch at those words. She didn't argue, she didn't push him away, because she knew Harry Sterling had changed. He was no longer just the ruthless, untouchable CEO she had once known. He was a father now, and for the first time, she wasn't afraid of letting him be one. Chapter 5. A True Family. The blinding white lights of the hospital made Harry Sterling squint. He hated hospitals. He hated the feeling of helplessness, of being forced to stay in one place. He hated the throbbing pain in his injured leg, but more than anything, he hated himself for allowing his son to be in danger. For years, he had believed that cold detachment was a strength, a shield to protect himself, but now that same coldness had nearly cost him everything. When David had pointed a gun at Theo, when his son had trembled and called him Dad, Harry had realized everything he once believed was a lie. He had almost lost his son because of his past mistakes, and if he didn't change, he might lose Amelie too. As he lay there deep in thought, he felt a gentle hand press against his forehead. Amelie, she was taking care of him, her eyes filled with worry. She hadn't left his side for days. She even made soup for him despite being a terrible cook. "How are you feeling?" Her voice was as soft as a breeze. Harry looked at her, not a passing glance, a real look, deep and unguarded, as if it was the first time he was allowing himself to truly see her. He wanted to say something, to admit everything, but his throat tightened, his heart hesitated. And then she smiled, a smile so gentle, so pure, that it shattered every last barrier inside him. For the first time in his life, Harry Sterling lowered his pride, dropped his defenses, and faced his heart. "Amelie," he spoke slowly, as if saying the most important words of his life. She turned to him, waiting. "I've loved you since 5 years ago." She froze. Harry had never said those words before, not to her, not to anyone. But this time, he wouldn't run away. "I'm not a man without feelings, Amelie." His voice was raw. "I just learned to lock them away. Everything in my life, business, power, money, was easier to control than my own emotions." He took a deep breath, his eyes searching hers. "But that night 5 years ago, you made me feel something I never had before, and it terrified me." Amelie's heart pounded. "So you left without a word?" Her voice trembled, hurt and vulnerable. Harry nodded. "I was a coward, Amelie, but when I learned that you had given birth to Theo, that you had raised him alone for 4 years, I knew I couldn't run anymore." His hand tightened around hers. "You and Theo are my family, and I will do whatever it takes to keep you both." Tears welled in Amelie's eyes. She had never expected this. She had never imagined that after all these years, he still thought about her. She placed her hand over his, gripping it tightly. "Harry, I never wanted your money or your power," she whispered. "I just wanted you, a real father for Theo, and a man who was willing to open his heart to me." Harry looked at her, his heart racing. For the first time, he understood. He didn't have to be strong alone anymore. A few days later, Harry was discharged. The moment he stepped outside, Theo came running toward him and threw his small arms around him, clutching him tightly. "Dad, you're not leaving again, right?" Theo's voice was small, filled with uncertainty. Harry knelt down, looking his son in the eye. "No, buddy. I'm not going anywhere. I promise." Amelie watched the two of them, her heart swelling. For the first time, she felt like she had truly found home. But she wasn't prepared for what happened next. When they got home, Harry had something waiting for her. As the sun set, casting golden hues over the small garden, Harry dropped to one knee and opened a small velvet box. A diamond ring sparkled inside. Amelie gasped. "Harry, what are you doing?" "I'm proposing, Amelie," her heart pounded. "But this is happening so fast," she stammered. Harry smiled, his eyes filled with certainty. "5 years ago, I made the mistake of running away because I was afraid of my feelings. I lost too much time, but now I won't waste another second." His voice lowered, steady and sincere. "Marry me, Amelie. Let's raise Theo together. Let's be a real family." From the side, Theo clapped excitedly. "Say yes, Mom. I want Dad to marry you." Amelie laughed through her tears. She looked at the man before her, the man who had changed, the man who had opened his heart, the man who was now willing to put family above all else. And she knew this was where she belonged. Yes. Their wedding wasn't extravagant. It wasn't about luxury or wealth. It was about love. Harry was no longer just a CEO obsessed with work. After everything, he had decided to change, not just in his personal life, but in his career as well. He started new projects focusing on helping the community, creating charity funds for single mothers and abandoned children, because he finally understood money and power were never the most important things. And on a sunny afternoon at the same park where it all began, Harry, Amelie, and Theo walked hand in hand. No more distance, no more fear, only love, trust, and a future filled with hope. Love isn't just passion and attraction. It is commitment and responsibility. Harry had spent years chasing the wrong things, believing that coldness and detachment would protect him, but he almost lost the people who mattered most. What mattered wasn't his wealth, his power, or his pride. It was Amelie and Theo, and he was finally ready to be the man they deserved. Thank you for following our story. Did this story touch your heart? Leave a comment below if you enjoyed the story. Don't forget to like,